gym, 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 gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym, gym, gym, gym,
gym,
gym, gym, gym, gym, gym, gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym,
gym. A glorious evening. That is a perfect still topic that I want to share. When he said yes, his body language, facial expression, and vocal variety showed us clearly. Let's turn to my line of trust. When I was a child, I had always believed that at midnight, December 24th, appearing and softly giving. Every year, Santa Claus always was appearing and softly giving gifts to me during a deep sleep. Sound like a fairy tale, but that was true for my childhood. Hence why I believe it is true. And who did that to happen? The answer is your dad, your mom, and your sibling made you to believe in it. However, when we grow up, we step out more into the world, meet more people, some dishonest, and even shifty. We begin to realize that not everyone thinks and acts the same as us. This is also the trust broken between people and people. For example, I had my friend. She and I study together. I always share my notes and my friend extra exercise from another class with her. However, she attend in class, never take note, and even she had extra exercise from her friends in another class. She didn't want to share with me. Nevertheless, I wonder why she didn't want to share with me, because I didn't ask her to share, so I asked her to share. Unfortunately, I still could not get the extra exercise, and I received a lot of exciting excuse and I never ever heard before. That's it amazing things that I realize trust is an interesting perfect still between people and people, body language, facial expression, and vocal variety. I love to discover more about it. Back to Toastmaster of the day. The Obamacare survey means signing up for Obamacare is still ridiculous, huh? Jason LaHolt is a parking attendant in Philadelphia with two small children. He is also one of nearly 50 million Americans without health insurance. He hopes to change that. He recently visited the Independent Express bus. Independence Blue Cross, a local insurer, is promoting coverage in the Obamacare. Middle-aged Holt was told he would qualify for public subsidy to buy insurance. That would be perfect, he says, if that's actually true. He could not find out. However, like millions of Americans who try to use healthcare government, the new Obamacare website, in its first week of operation, he found that it was not working. The helpful people on the Blue Cross bus could not help him. They say that when the site starts working, they call me back, he said. Since October 1st, when Obamacare health insurance exchanges were launched, they had been pledged by leases. The federal government, which is operating in exchange on behalf of 66 states, has seen some of the worst problems. Officials say that too many people try to log on at once. Within 3 days, 8.6 million had visited healthcare government but having supported health reform for years. Middle Obama teams should hardly be surprised that Americans decide to check it out. The leak may be short-lived. Officials and the contractors are rushing to fix them. New York's exchange seems to have recovered in 1 week. It quadrupled the capacity of its computer server, and as of October 8th, more than 40,000 New Yorkers had signed up for coverage. But other exchanges are making slower process. Surplus and healthcare government are tweeting their frustration. Soon, now I can't even log in. This site will be the death of me. The health department has yet to report how many people have managed to enroll in the federal exchange. On this unfortunate, Obamacare's main goal is to expand access to cheap insurance. It offers subsidies to those who cannot afford it, and plus insurers from charging people more because they are sick. The sick who lack insurance will probably keep trying to enroll. The young and healthy may give up more quickly if it is too difficult, and if they do, the insurance firms that offer policy via the exchange will find that their pool and customers is disproportionately sick and costly to cover. This may spur them to raise price for everyone, making the young and healthy even less likely to enroll. Despite the small fines they would have to pay if they lacked insurance, a debt spiral could flow. A debt spiral could follow. The success of Obamacare depends on getting lots of people to sign up. So, non-profit groups, insurers, and some states are energetically promoting the exchange. And Run America, a group run by a former White House employee, is mining data to find the uninsured, then go in door to door to urge them to buy coverage. Odin has, as with ski insurance songs, surely a new gen to care for each one. Every daughter and son live along Oregon, but shut a fox.
That you would like to hear about. Any questions that are top of mind, anything you would like the panel to address this afternoon, so that as we go through, we can bear that in mind. Any issues, any concerns, or you've got it all down pat? Good. So you guys have got a very easy job this afternoon. Okay. Let me very briefly introduce His Excellency, the Ambassador of Switzerland to Singapore, Thomas Kupfer. The Ambassador has been in Singapore since September 2012, and he has over 30 years' experience in government. He's been a senior diplomat internationally, and has served most recently as Ambassador in Colombia and Korea. Professor David Chun, who will be very well known to many of you here, is a director of the Behavioral Sciences Institute. He's the director of Behavioral Sciences Institute, the Lee Kuan Yew Fellow and the Professor of Psychology at the Singapore Management University. Professor Chan's work is cited widely. He is an expert on trust issues and has worked closely with the Singapore government and other institutions on the issues. Ms. Angie Kim is the Managing Director of Novartis in Singapore. As a representative of the business community, she brings a commercial perspective and some interesting insights on the trust equation between business and the community, particularly in the area of healthcare. I would note, given the introduction of my interest in women's leadership, that she is one of the 13 most senior women leaders in Novartis globally, and that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And lastly, Dr. Kringsap, again well known to many of you, and President of the Institute of Future Studies for Development in Thailand, a senior fellow at Harvard, politician, member of Parliament, and advisor to the Prime Minister in Thailand. So we have an incredibly distinguished panel this afternoon, and I think you have a fantastic opportunity to learn from all of them. So, with that, can I invite Professor David Chun to make some introductory remarks for us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Looking at the setting, I think I can be pretty informal, right, for this forum, I hope. Is that okay, Penny? There are quite a few of us, and looking at the time, I think we should not spend more than 5 to 10 minutes each. So I'm just going to give you an overview of what I think trust is. Not just my personal opinion, but recently I've done a review across different disciplines, spent 3 months on it, my colleague and I, and we have looked at how different disciplines look at trust, and I thought instead of giving you a very academic kind of a session, just to give you some views and so that it sets the setting. I think regardless of which discipline, when you look at trust, there is a problem when trust is not defined. When you don't look at trust in terms of its dimensionality, who is the truster, who is the trustee, what the context you're talking about, people get really upset, people get really very angry, very often because we are using the same words to refer to different things, or we are referring to to the same thing but using different words. So I think as we talk about trust later, I would suggest that we revisit our assumptions, stand back a little bit when we disagree and say, hey, are we talking about the same thing? Or are we actually talking about the same thing but just using different words? I think that would be one good approach to avoid the confirmatory bias in the way that we look at data or look at arguments and so on. I would just say that trust, most researchers, at least the empirical ones, right, the behavioral scientists, the sociologists, the political scientists, when you look at the data, we tend to dissect the dimensionality of trust into three kinds of dimensions, right? One is trust in competence. In other words, can you do the job? That's your core technical proficiency, that what you're supposed to do. And competence is quite simple. It's ability, capacities. Can you solve my problems, whether it's routine time, peace time, or crisis time, emergency times, or war times? So in Singapore, if you have a very good infrastructures, if you have low crime rates, you have safety, your trust in competence of the government will tend to increase. But if your infrastructure is unable to handle the large population and get big crowding and all, and prices are expensive, then your trust in competence actually will decrease because you are not solving my day-to-day problems or in times of crisis and so on. So that's trust in competence. And then there's trust in integrity, which is really easy for most of us, but actually it's not as easy as it seems. Because trust in integrity is my assessment of your character. So if I look at the government, actually government is not one person, but the whole civil service, the whole public service, the police, the military, and most importantly, probably the political leaders. So when we look at them about trust in integrity, we tend to talk about very strong, passionate, moral issues of incorruptibility and trustworthiness in a very general sense and so on. But we tend to forget that trust and integrity has a very important angle to it, and that is how do you treat violations of integrity? And that actually is quite implicit. So if there is one of my officers who is caught for corruption, does the system ensure that this person gets prosecuted by the full force of the law, that things are transparent and so on? And that part of the integrity system does not exist at the individual level, but it exists at the system level. So when you say trust in a person's integrity, this part of what do you do about it, the system, only applies when you trust in a particular system, and trust in government is quite unique on that. And finally, which is not quite well researched, I must say, and not quite well talked about in Singapore and elsewhere, but to me, the most important trust dimension is what I call trust in benevolence. And that is, do I trust the intentions and motivations of what you say? So when the government tells me something, that this policy is for this purpose, do I as a citizen actually trust you? And then you say, I do this because, do I actually believe you? That is not really integrity, and that is definitely not competence. That is trust in benevolence. So the literature is quite clear. When benevolence is low, a lot of things just can't get done, right? And we can talk about more about this during question and answers, about the different dimensions of trust. What does it mean for Singapore elsewhere? And how static or how dynamic trust is. So I think I should leave it as that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Can I invite Dr. Pringsak to give us some comments?
Thank you very much, Penny. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very privileged to be invited by Penny Low, as well, to be here and to be chaired by Penny Burt. Let me just briefly walk through the 5 minutes short message we're going to share together over this issue of trust. And my colleagues here, Professor David Chan, has so well spoken about the parameters of those three definitions. I wanted to paint a broader picture for the beginning, and then end up with the issue of Thailand that you request me to give as an example. Well, I feel that trust has multi-dimensional, as being mentioned. Therefore, to deal with trust, we need to be comprehensive, we need to be integrative, and we need to be balanced in looking at all those aspects so that the inclusivity can be found. And I look at trust also from the conditionality that if you look at the necessary condition for trust, It has to be that when you want to have effectiveness, the necessary condition would be that you do not cause the breakdown of effectiveness by looking at the issue of cost and benefit. If whenever the cost outweigh the benefit, then I think we're going to cause the effectiveness breakdown. But the sufficient condition, if we may call it that way, the breakdown of efficiency going to happen whenever you have the amount of trust decreasing, then the cost of trust going up. By looking at it from that kind of picture, my definition of trust, therefore, will give me the ideas of some of these terms, for example, intentionality, the word of credibility, sincerity, honesty, integrity, and so on. If I put in this kind of a framework, therefore, when you have trust, you have committed you have belief in committed promise. If you look at various sectors that we have today in society, you have governmental sector, you have which represented by the political sector who are leading that. You have the academia, you have the business, you have the social sector. I would say that the way to be able to look at trust in a society, you have to look at all these sectors and see how the society are working through all this. To create trust, we have to persuade so that we can have influence by the persuasion process in a society. We also need to inspire so that people will be moved in their mind. We also need to powerize so that we empower this kind of ability to accept trust. By looking at this way, I wanted to apply to the issue of my society in Thailand today, which is probably in your mind today, that Thailand is going through a very fluidity of our situation very much. Look at all these sectors. The government sector has very low trust level in my society. Anything that is being said by politicians, usually on average, are very, very, very difficult to receive that trust in a society. Basically because, for example, the issue of transparency, which is often suspect, conflict of interest, that make, whenever you speak with conflict of interest, the trust level go down. And often the government sector, led by the political sectors, are often looked upon with lack of transparency. The corruption perception index is always high and suspected before you even say anything. And because of that conflict of interest in the role that it plays, and the way media portray political sectors, therefore, it has a huge difficulty in creating trust in that society. My belief and my analysis of my country would be that the sector that have the highest level of trust is the academia. And fortunately, I spent so many years of my life in academia and also as a politician. Therefore, you enjoy that kind of overlay behind you when that you have some kind of neutrality and you have kind of evidence-based in what you say in parliament and so on. And if you can be perceived by the media that you do not have that conflict of interest, and you have always never been attacked by the media for being not transparent, therefore, by allowing that kind of flavor of academia who are standing behind any issue often have a higher level of trust than politicians. The business sector are highly being suspicious because of the way they're profit-seeking in their mentality, and therefore whatever they do is being looked upon as if they are doing some token appeasement to the society by doing their CSR, by doing even social investment of any kind. So the way the people look at the business sector, they are having a hard time, struggling for the level of trust. The social sector, the NGOs, also highly suspected in Thailand, being looked upon as if their agenda are being set by people who donate to them. And often they are looked at as if they are troublemaker, they're nuisance creator, in any protesting on any issues that is happening in society. Single issue approach. And hence in the entire society, the level of trust is so low. Fortunately, the academia has much more respectability and trust than any other sector and can often be called upon to leverage some of the situation, as you can see even right now while I'm talking the situation in Thailand. Analyzing it this way, may I bring down to the conclusion that a society without trust, as I put it in my own terminology, that you have the axis of efficiency and effectiveness, and the breakdown of efficiencies will happen whenever the trust level go down, the cost of the society go up. And the axis of effectiveness, as I mentioned, will break down whenever the cost outweighs the benefit. In a society, when you don't live in that necessary and sufficient condition for trust, a society cannot function in its full capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was extremely interesting and topical. Just a quick reminder for everyone, when I was prompted to think about this when we talk about media, could we just request from the panel that we have Chatham House rules for this panel? And if people don't understand what that means, that is, we would actually like to be able to speak freely without media reporting what's being said and people taking this conversation outside the room. It just allows everyone to be much freer. So that's just our request to you. Thank you. Ambassador, could I call on you to give us some remarks and share your perspectives as someone who's worked within government for a very long time and in a country in Switzerland that has some unique features?
Thank you, Penny, and the other Penny, thank you for the invitation. Full of pennies here. No, I'm very pleased to assist this forum and also this panel today. Even for once we have, could almost say, a Swiss majority here on the panel, because AJ came from Novartis, as she's Korean, we knew each other there, but she represents a Swiss-based company, as we know, and so we are two Swiss here, which is kind of a nice thing. Anyway, it's very nice anyway, as a Swiss being in Singapore and in Asia in general, because our, and I'm glad to say so, the image and in a way we could even say the trust which people or society or business or governments have in this area of the world, and particularly also in Singapore, into Switzerland, is very high, which makes the work for the ambassador always easier. But still, trust also now, and you wouldn't be surprised that I want to give you some kind of hints on how the situation is in Switzerland on trust. It's not a situation in which you just can relax and say we have achieved something, we just relax. We see this in Singapore very strongly. Singapore always wants to continue and is not yet at all reassertive on his achievements. And in a way in Switzerland this is similar. Even our development went over a much longer period, over centuries, and certainly about 100, 150 years of industrial development, society development, democratic consciousness, all these things developed over many, many, many years and have become so kind of, in a way, solid. Certainly some particularities of Switzerland, which you know, I don't want to go into details, we have no time now for that, but there is certainly our famous neutrality, which perhaps is not that now relevant in this context. Perhaps it gives us an international trust. Yes, that's true. As a diplomat, I feel it often because partner countries and partner governments and society says, yes, we can trust the Swiss because they're not standing on one side or the other. But also there today, neutrality cannot mean also, and it's not our understanding anymore, not to take a position. Neutrality means today, perhaps, as I said, not to be in a military alliance or in a very strong political alliance, but today in the world you have to take positions being in the political, economic, social, whatever side. Now the other two issues which perhaps are more in our system of Switzerland more directly related to this trust issue is our federalistic structure. That means we are a federal country, but we have cantons and we have communities. So this already includes then the different sections of the country with different languages, different religions, different cultures. And it's very much linked then to the most important issue of Switzerland, which makes us a little bit special system, is the direct democracy. The direct democracy, which is unique as it's developed in Switzerland, that there is a very direct, almost not I would say daily, but quarterly relation between the citizen and his city government or his cantonal government or the national government and parliament, in the sense that many questions, as you know, which are decided on a political level in normal procedure, proposed by administration, government, comes then to parliament and approved, can then again put to the citizen the questions if the citizen likes this or not. It can be in a more reactive way by a referendum, that people say we don't like this decision by the government. It can even be done in a very proactive way with an initiative that people, political parties, groups, NGOs, society can say we would like this and this happens, change of a law, change of the constitution. Why I'm saying this is that in a way is a barometer of almost routine trust factor of if what is decided by the government and the system is accepted by the people. I'm not now saying that this is a system which has absolutely must be transposed to all other countries. That's very much a Swiss grown system. But it is certainly a factor of which builds and there is trust automatically or necessary between the citizens and the government. And just to not be only on a positive note is we have in Switzerland a very, like Singapore, a very well-functioning, strong economy. We are a financial center as you are, and probably even longer standing and perhaps even more advanced, but today very well competed by Singapore. We have many other economies, sectors like the pharma, the high-tech, all these sectors which developed very well. And they have generally trust in Switzerland because they brought welfare to the Swiss society, but they have also trust internationally because they are well-reputed companies and they do well. They have also developed very good schemes of social corporate responsibilities, being the big companies, like one is for example Novartis, but also very many small and medium-sized companies which are active nationally and internationally. But as an example how things can change, and hopefully it changes again in a positive way, it was quite interesting to observe the banking sector of Switzerland over the last few years. Swiss banks, and particularly the big banks, we have two very big banks, you know them, very successful for many years. But then our scheme of part of our success came into questions by other countries, other financial centers. For example, that non-taxed money came over many, many years to Switzerland. The Swiss position was always a little bit, we're not looking for this money, our banks, but it's really up to every country to make sure that its tax system is so organized that people pay taxes in their country. This was accepted for many, many years, for decades. In the last 5-10 years, the political opinion has changed around the world. For the economic crisis, financial crisis helped to that. The thinking is different. It's also an issue where Singapore is very much aware on this, even this issue is not yet that of actuality here in Asia. So the Swiss banks came under, and the Swiss financial sector came under strong pressure to change, to be more cooperative in exchanging of information and cooperative with other governments to make sure that the system is more equitable with our partners. And this discussion, interestingly, came together with a more a topic of management. Swiss big society companies, and particularly the Swiss banks, went a little bit in the direction of US economy. The higher you are, the more money you have to get, and it went totally out of context. Swiss bank manager and other managers were known that they get so high salaries, which was not a tradition in Switzerland, that it was very much criticized by the Swiss people, and linked these two topics together, brought the conclusion that there was a huge loss of trust, in this case, towards the banks in Switzerland. Now, decisions have been taken, there was some measures applied, and banks in this case have to again now regain their confidence to the society, to the consumer, and also to the Swiss, almost also to the Swiss government. This just as an example that things can change also, and in a successful system like Switzerland. I'm very happy to come in the discussion, go more in details in one of the other points, but this was my introductory remarks to let and set a little bit the tone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and that was very interesting perspective on the situation in Switzerland. And I think when we come to the discussion, we can obviously compare and contrast the experience in the different countries we're talking about. Now, could I ask Angie to share with us some specific perspectives from the business sector? We know that confidence in and trust in business is at an all-time low, and that there are some very special challenges that business faces in winning the trust, and particularly in the pharmaceutical sector, which Angie's going to talk about today, and in healthcare. So thank you.
Thank you, Penny, and also thank you very much for our invitation. I realize this group is very diverse, and also I'm happy that I'm adding some diversity here as a Korean, and also speaking Korean accent. I hope you all understand. And also maybe only panel from commercial sector, and also using some PowerPoint, because industry people cannot speak without PowerPoint, right? So as Penny mentioned, I will be specifically talking about healthcare and also pharmaceutical industry, because working in pharma industry now 18 years, maybe I can just share my view on how trust is built in healthcare and how we are driving some inclusiveness in the healthcare sector. So I only have 10 pages. Okay, so let's talk about the world. So now this world we're living is actually now home to more than 7 billion of the people, right? And as of me, every one of us are interested in our own health. So healthcare becomes very relevant, and also we all have a different needs in healthcare. So there is no question about everyone in this world should be able to obtain the good health service, which we call in the industry access to the healthcare, right? So basically the access to the healthcare means that it's a basic human right, regardless of where you're born, who you are, how rich you are, so you need to have access to healthcare, right? So then let's really try to understand what will determine the access system. So I will talk about 4 different elements. So number 1, access means that the system, we need a system which is very strong and efficient and well-run healthcare systems. And usually this healthcare system is designed by public sector, which often government, right? Second element which determines the access to the healthcare is we call affordability, which is basically money, financial ability to pay for it. And this affordability is the system for financing health service by individual or by government. So people don't really suffer from financial hardship when they have to pay. And this affordability depends on which healthcare system you have. This affordability can be a larger issue or it can be less issue, right, to the individual. Another thing about access is access to the essential medicines and technology, because this will help you to diagnose your health problem and also treat the medical issues. And last but also not least, the important point about access is you need a people who is basically sufficient enough to drive the good healthcare system. And these people should be well trained and motivated health workers. So they can provide the necessary healthcare system with whatever available medicines and systems. So healthcare system, affordability, and access to medicine, people, those are 4 elements which will determine the basic access to healthcare. Then why this access to healthcare is important? So let's just think about ourselves. If we have some medical problem, if there is no good access to healthcare, what will impact you? Socially and economically, right? So it will enable people to be more productive and also become an active contributor to your family and also to community if you are free from any medical difficulties, right? What about children? If it will enable you, the children, to go to school and be educated and become a future resources for the community. So this access becomes very important to people and also children as well. At the same time, financial risk protection, which means related to affordability, which will prevent people from being pushed into poverty when they have to pay everything for healthcare out of their own pocket. So that's why, with all the reasons, addressing the healthcare access issue is a critical component of social development and also poverty reduction, and also key element of reduce social inequality. So now I would really like to spend a little bit time and talk about how industry contributes in this system. So basically, for the pharmaceutical industry, the primary contribution itself is research, discovery, and develop the products, and which will help prevent and also cure the disease. So it improve your quality of life later on. However, the problem or challenge here is no single company, regardless, no matter how they committed are to the patient, can solve this problem, which is access gap. So improving access to healthcare is the goal to be shared between public, NGO, industry, and foundations. So this barrier can be only addressed when we are working as collectively in a very effective and coordinated manner. And you may agree that this challenge around this healthcare will be maybe larger in developing countries. Maybe because of the affordability issue is larger, or maybe because of less sophisticated healthcare system there, or lack of human resources there. Then in developing world, how does industry really take some effort to improve the access to healthcare in such conditions? And I will briefly mention about how we are working to address those 4 elements which I explained before about education, R&D, and innovate pricing itself, and also system. Let me first of all talk about educations. My company recently introduced the concept of social venture, which intention is to serve millions of people in rural area, in developing area, with health educations, as well as affordable treatment. Because this a significant part of this program is investment in education. Because we believe that even the best medicine in the world may not work if the basic sanitation or healthcare practice is not in place. So education as well as the medicine should come in hand together to drive the effective system here. So for example, in India, we have launched a program called Healthy Family, which becomes self-sustaining in less than 3 years. So basically the concept of this program is bringing on-the-ground education team from the traveling health educators and also from the company to drive the best basic education in the rural area. So it essentially reinforces the importance of education in the access to healthcare. Another element I want to mention is, I mentioned that pharmaceutical industry is primarily focused on R&D, research and development. However, R&D for rare disease and neglected disease such as malaria or dengue traditionally has a very little attention so far. But fortunately, that is now changing. And we call this approach science without border, as you can see from the slide. Which means to say that This recognizes and embraces the needs of increasingly diverse patient needs, especially for rare disease and also neglected disease. So it becomes more way to build a trust with the developing countries or developing world. Another approach to be inclusive is in terms of pricing, which improve affordability. So it can be just one of the many models we are trying, but it can be achieved from the differentiated pricing or in introducing generics at the patent expiry. This is my last page about system. So industry is also working with the government to share the best practice from this one country to the other country, because the challenge around the system may be similar or may be different. So bringing all the experts in healthcare system and also healthcare leaders together to really exchange what they have done in another country and try in another country, transfer of the knowledge can be very effective in building more effective system here. So those are the brief introduction about what does trust means in the healthcare setting and how industry drive together with other public sectors in building more trust. So with this, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that very informative overview of what Novartis is doing in the healthcare system to build trust and to engage with the community. It's extremely interesting. So, with that, we're now going to move into the question session. I can kick off, but I would like to ask first if anyone in the audience has got some questions for the panel. Could we just take one question here?
Just one second, we're going to mind.
I'm Rekha Modi from Global Women Forum. I would like to ask the distinguished panel that we are talking about trust, but should we also deliberate upon the trust of the family? The children, do they believe in the family? The women, do they believe that the family will protect them, or is it going to disappear? So trust in the family is an issue we should think about.
Thank you. I'm just going to collect a few questions to help inform the panel discussion. So trust in the family unit, that's an important issue. Other major issues or questions that people have that have been spurred by the presentations?
Good afternoon. May I ask a question? Now, because our panelists are all from represent different countries, then may I ask, are the ways of building trust different in different countries? How are the difference? How are the difference manifest itself?
You just stole one of my questions. Nice one. Anyone else? That's an excellent question, and I think that given that we have this very diverse panel, that's very much something we'd like to explore a little bit more. We've already heard a little bit about the differences. Thank you, sir.
Ilya Ferber from the Computational Social Cognition Group at A*STAR. I have a question about one of the things that I think makes trust difficult at the national level, and that's that it's in some sense a collective action problem, right? That any given person can have a commitment to trust, top leadership can have a commitment to trust, but especially during a crisis or when someone is sort of in the spotlight, their incentives may be very different because there's something more important to them at the moment than sort of long-term trust building. So I think it's hard over time for something as large as a government to avoid slips from occasional individual people. Right? So I was wondering if you have any suggestions about what people can do to encourage that sort of as a culture or through incentives so that even when someone's in a crisis situation, they're still taking the trust issue seriously.
Great question. Any others? If I could kick off, and now that we've tabled those questions, so we have trust in the family. Are the ways of building trust different in different countries? Trust at the national level requires collective action. How you manage to, in times of crisis, where the impetus to build trust might actually have to be weighed against short-term impairments. So, with those, could I actually just turn to David and say, David, you've done a lot of work on the trust equation in Singapore, and you have talked about Singapore going through a state of trust in transition. What do you mean by that? And would you be happy to talk a little bit about the trust equation in Singapore and what some of these drivers are and how they might differ in Singapore to what we've heard about in Thailand and in Switzerland? Thank you.
So do you want me to address the question? So talk about trust in transition or
Maybe if we start off by talking about Singapore and trust in transition, and we're going to get to all of these questions as we go through. Thank you.
Well, trust in transition hyphenated is a concept which I kind of used or coined recently. After my colleague and my colleague Don Ferry at the Singapore Management University, who's a trust expert with me, and we looked at all the literature, and then we started writing this big report, talk about what trust is and everything. And of course, he's not Singaporean, I am, and of course I feel very strong about situations in Singapore now. And I then started writing chapters that are quite specific to Singapore. And in the course of doing, I kind of recognized or realized that I don't think the literature addressed a very fundamental issue that's happening in Singapore now, which could well be happening in other organizations or other countries. And so I then decided that I need to talk about it. So I wrote a Straits Times article about it and mentioned trust in transition. Let me very quickly explain what that is. If you have a scale of 1 to 10 on trust in government, you can think about some people who, no matter how the government changes, how great the government is, you will still be 1 to maybe 3 the most. Because you have decided that this government is not somebody I like, ideologically, philosophically, or I have some bad experience with you, so I'm not going to look at evidence, I'm going to vote you out. Then there are people that are 9 and 10 forever. No matter what happened in the government, no matter how many crises, how badly you do, it's always 9 and 10. I'm a die-hard supporter. And then there are the people who are your swing votes, right? I mean, that is the traditional way of looking at things. And the people in the middle tend to give 3 on a 5-point scale. I'm neutral and so on. I'm indifferent. And I think that is a very bad representation of a lot of things that are going on, especially in Singapore. I would argue that a lot of people in the middle are not your swing votes. Many of the people in the middle could very well be people who used to be 8, 9, and 10, and they are in a very committed relationship and trust with this trustee. In this case, this example is the government. And the more we used to have a good record, the more difficult it becomes. Because Singapore used to be such a pleasant place, everything is safe, you know, you almost don't have to do anything. And then in the last 10 years, and there's no secret, and the media is not here, there's no secret, in the last 10 years, things are great for certain groups of people, but not so for others. And everybody knows about the problems of public transport, housing prices, and so on. Now, the people who are affected are the large middle class, mainly, and these people used to have a very positive respect for Singapore government and so on. So these people are not neutral to begin with. And they are in trust in transition now because they find it very difficult rationally to continue the 8 and 9, 10 in your scores. But they are not your neutral people. And I would argue this is a very important stage for government and groups to look at. Because when these people decide to not trust you, they are more powerful than the people who have never trusted you. Right? Because they are sort of your people to begin with. And I don't think the trust literature looks at that. They look at trust as a score, look at neutrality, and these are not fence-sitters. And that the trust in transition is important, is political, very political, because what that means is whatever things that happen during this period, I can sway this group of people into trust or distrust. But they are not your fence-sitter. And that's what we meant by trust in transition. I think we'll address the questions later.
Yeah, we will. Don't worry, I have a list of your questions. We're just going to touch on these issues as we go through. We actually had a very interesting question about how, not only how do systems differ, but what are the ways that governments can build trust? What is a way, and Ambassador, you spoke about in Switzerland the process of direct democracy. So the government actually consults the people really regularly on big policy decisions. What actually happens if the government makes a policy decision and consults and finds out that the community isn't comfortable? What do they do in that situation? And what learnings are there, perhaps for other situations where governments and the community sometimes have different objectives and different views on an issue?
Yes, thank you. to come just to your direct questions in Switzerland, and afterwards I would like to enlarge a little bit. In Switzerland, obviously there's also always these questions of trust, that it's not a guarantee that you have this referendum all the time, that trust is absolutely high, but it is, let's say, it forces the leading class automatically to decide in a way, in anticipating already strongly what they think that also people would accept. This is obviously an attitude which politicians in all countries should have or pretend to have. I mean, that's the way the world works. But the reality sometimes is a little bit different. So I would say it helps certainly to make sure that the government doesn't go too far in a direction where the people wouldn't like it as such. I would like to give a few comments on these questions of different cultures, different societies, and what's the issue of trust. Obviously, I also have not the answer on all these questions, but my experience shows me that I would think that there are many factors who play a role. Obviously, it is certainly the long-standing culture of a society. I have now had this experience in Korea, now I'm living here, and obviously in this part of the world, elements like Confucianism, where there is a strong trust and respect for example, not so much for the government necessarily, but for the age, for the elderly people, for the people who have some wisdom, like in Thailand, Professor said strongly in academy, is certainly an important factor, perhaps stronger than, for example, than in Europe. On the other hand, it's also, I see elements that even countries which are close in these cultural things react very different in concrete situations. For example, I had this very interesting experience. I was there during the tsunami and then also the nuclear problems in Japan, in Korea, so neighboring country. So I could follow what's happening in Japan. This is a dramatic incident where people, obviously, they were also very much concerned, very much touched, but generally for a long time very strongly following the government and not putting really things too much into question. Afterwards, obviously, discussion came also up. In the same period when I was in Korea, which was not directly touched by it, but there was a big fear that the cloud could come over and Korea could also be very much contaminated. My experience was that people didn't trust it at all, the government at that time. They said, yes, they said, this is not true, the figures you give us. So on a very similar issue, in a very similar regional context, different reactions, just as an example. And I see it in Europe myself. I mean, I was speaking a lot of Switzerland. I know, for example, Italy, my neighboring country, very well, as I happen to be married for many, many years with an Italian. So I have an idea about Italy, and also, I love Italy, but the difference, and not now particularly because perhaps there are some government problems, but the tradition in Italy since many, many decades of absolutely no trust to the government, and in Switzerland, where there is a general trust to the government, I would say, is huge. And this is, we live about in a similar cultural environment. So what are the factors? It could be how the political system developed, how the government is the people who govern are really controlled by the people, how they not abuse their power, and so on. So there are many factors probably which play a role, and there's not really one trust pattern all over the world, I would say.
Interesting, thank you. Dr. Prince, given your observations about the trust that academics have in Thailand, and your role both as an academic and as a politician, what do you think are ways that governments can build trust? What could they learn from the experience of academics in Thailand, for example? What can they learn from that situation about ways of building that trust?
I would suggest that the government has to be very smart in putting issue on the table so that the public can participate in discussion by thought leaders. Usually academia would lead that as well, and many other kind of thought leaders, that they could debate, dialogue it through to crystallize the entire participation process, so that it distill through the whole thing before the government take action of any kind. That would be one suggestion I would make to any government in Thailand, that if they don't do that, you're caught in this continual oppositions of ideas that never been debated through, dialogue through the whole process. That would be one. Participation at the fullest level. It may be slower, but it will be much more conducive. My second suggestion, in my experience in Parliament, would be that if you give your good reasons and you reason with your people sufficiently, you know, in the end, no matter how much debate is going on, your reason will come through. So if you do not use that aspect sufficiently and you just bulldoze through your policy without reasoning enough for the people, it will be hard. If the Prime Minister, for example, as a head of government, would come up on television and explain and keep explaining, it eventually will come through if there's a patient of that nature. The third aspect that I would suggest would be that you have to manage the media. When I say manage media, I don't mean to manipulate the media. I don't mean to interfere with the neutrality of the media or not giving freedom to the media. On the contrary, you give them the full freedom. But at the same time, you have to be careful. The media are people who need to publish or to say something, to put on television the next day quickly enough to compete with other people. They may not be careful enough in their overall balanced presentation. And without you managing them properly so that you can give them sufficient information in a balanced fashion and able to give them all the detailed solution that and be able to outwit, to may put it that way, outwit them to know what they may like, the juiciness of the news, and able to catch them before they put on headlines. If the government is not wise enough to manage the media in that positive fashion, you end up being painted over with a caricature of you that is not real. And hence, once it's out into the public, it's so hard to correct the image. And this is what I think what most governments in Thailand haven't learned so far. They either go the extreme of manipulating the media or let go and let the media say whatever they want and never able to manage it in a positive way. My suggestion would be the three things that may be very, very helpful. If I may add on what I referred to earlier, the thought leaders. Thought leaders are many kinds, and if you can ditch out the right one that have credibility and trust factors that are very high in the public, and allow those people to be the one that speak out their mind, it may be a much more helpful way than you do it yourself, because the society trusts those leaders that have credibility.
Thank you. Professor, would you like to share some thoughts with us on trust-building efforts in the Singapore community, beyond this one?
Okay, but maybe I can put it in one generic one, because many interesting ideas have been thrown out. We use the word thought leader all the time. Actually, my definition of thought leaders are the people that you thought they are leaders. So if you think we are leaders, we are thought leaders, but if you don't think we are not, then we are not. So I think thought leaders, and this is just half a joke, it's quite serious actually. If you think about it carefully, thought leaders for you, as opposed to defined by the government, is people you thought are your leaders, and these people affect your thoughts. So thought leaders can be good thought leaders and bad thought leaders. And you look at bloggers, social media, government, academics, you can have good academics and bad academics. You can have media who are manipulating your media or not. And actually whether you are good or bad and whether you are controlled by the government is called orthogonal, meaning independent. Right? And I don't say it just because I'm in Singapore. Just because you are controlled or not controlled by itself actually tells you nothing about good or bad. Because it depends what you are controlling, which aspect, what's the purpose, and so on. Which is quite fundamentally different from an ideological perspective about the press being the fourth pillar and things like that. Right? So those are. So conceptually, you don't have to take a different ideological position to say that. So control and goodness, I think, need to separate. So that's the thought leader response that I thought I should say. Now, academics, are they trusted in Singapore or not? Actually, we don't know yet. I'm an academic, because it's an evolving thing. You don't have a long history. And academics, there are at least two main types, right? There's the people you think that are the natural sciences, people who do things to solve society's problem, but some master actually they decide what the problems are and you solve. Then there are the social scientists, but broadly speaking, where you think that for a long time they define the problem as well. They say what the problem and they advocate. And I think because of that very wrong kind of definitions of academics can be quite dangerous in countries whereby you think that social scientists may become advocacy groups and advocate things which you as a government may not like. I'm not saying that Singapore is like that, but because if Singapore being young and if the earlier experiences are not so good with certain academics from certain disciplines, from certain universities, it does form a mindset whereby the government is a little bit more cautious. But things have clearly been changing, right? Because government begins to realize, at least in Singapore, that when you look at social and behavioral sciences, it is really quite diverse. And academics per se need not necessarily be advocacy groups. They can be a very important voices. Maybe my just final point about building trust is, and we can come back to that later. I think trust building is different from trust repair. And then we always forgot about that. We just thought, okay, I want trust. I don't want to have low trust, so I do one thing. There are two distinct things here. When there's a trust violation, you have to repair the trust. So politicians come out and apologize for extramarital affairs. That's not trust building, that's trust repair, because you already violated the trust and you're doing a trust violation. And research has shown across that actually there are certain fundamentals about trust repair strategies that tend to apply across cultures quite broadly. Like when you apologize, you don't just always apologize and cry. It's not very effective sometimes. You need to just decide how to apologize. So the very good apologies, there are certain elements to it. So there are quite a lot of research in the behavioral sciences on that. Then trust building is quite different. And that links to Ilya's important question about when there's a crisis, things just got to be done. When things happen, you have no time to go and talk all the so-called fluffy stuff. And that's why it's so important that you don't build trust only when you need to. You build trust now. Right? You build trust because trust needs to be there when things happen. So I'll just leave it as that.
That's a really important point. Angie?
I just want to make a quick comment about this private sector, how we have to build or maintain the trust. So Professor Krian Sa mentioned about the little trust on the industry in Thailand, in your country, which for me is having very surprised. While I think the company is supposed to really make a money and profit, that is a kind of primary objective for the company. But at the same time, for me, there is an increasing needs of meeting the expectation of different stakeholders as a responsible corporate citizenship. So the commitment of the company being a good corporate citizenship becomes very important, I think, to build or maintain the trust in the society. So what is the commitment? What does commitment look like? For me, it can be, especially for the healthcare company, it can be supporting this rural area, as I mentioned, or it can be supporting the basic human right. It can be supporting the labor, also supporting the environment, and also making self-regulation to be absolutely ethical, and also avoiding the corruption. So those can be, for me, should be the way to really build the trust in the private sector, at least.
Thank you. Ambassador.
Thank you. If I can add a little bit to this discussion. I think the discussion showed it clearly. Trust and confidence also goes in two ways. In private life and family, as the lady asked, between couple, between children and parents. but also obviously in the society, in politics. And I think this is an important point that we have to always see that it goes in the both directions. And I would say a little bit very differentiated, but in a funny way. Perhaps if you're looking around the world, there are countries, there are still quite many where, and we have seen it here, where people have still some more or less trust to its governments. But then there's also, on the other way around, there is also obviously very much differences, probably when you would analysis it clearly, of trust from the government to its people. And I think these two things, as much they could match together, that would be the ideal, which doesn't exist necessarily in the world. So I believe that the higher, the more a society develops on a economic wealth scheme, education, and then also political maturity, the more probably this trust will go probably or should go automatically in both directions. And it's obvious that perhaps in countries where because they still need to develop its economy, enough food for everybody, enough education for everybody, there perhaps the tendency is often, if you look at history, that in these countries often there is still a little bit a stronger belief by the ruling class that they think they should give more guidance to the society, more strict rules, and tell the citizen what has to be done. In a society perhaps where it has already achieved more of civic matureness, it's difficult exactly to define what it means exactly, but you can imagine what I could think of. There, then perhaps this issue of mutual trust in both directions and giving the responsibility directly to the citizen and to also involve very much civil society, as it's been done in many of our countries, becomes more important. So I think it's a little bit a growing process where every country has its own development according to its history.
Thank you. And we had a question from Professor Anne Florini. Thank you. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks. I wanted to raise a point that it's actually three different things that I've heard today. One is what we've been hearing from the Edelman Trust Barometer about the rapid decline in trust in both business and government in Asia. And I think Thailand's a little unusual. NGOs and civil society organizations in other parts of Asia are actually seeing increasing levels of trust. David's point about a concept I've never heard articulated quite that way before, but trust in benevolence, which I think is a very interesting phrase. And Angie Kim's, this is a little unfair because I think it was an offhand comment, about the purpose of corporations is to make profits. I want to challenge that last point, because if the purpose of corporations is to make profits, it's hard to see how there is ever trust in the benevolence of corporations. If the purpose of corporations is to create a product or a service that people need, and profit mechanism is a mechanism that enables them to go on doing so, then there's a basis for social trust. But I think exactly why we are seeing the kinds of decline of trust in business that we are seeing all over the world now, this is not an Asian phenomenon, is exactly because we've gone way off the deep end on putting profit above purpose. We hear a lot of conversations now about the purpose-driven corporation, but in fact, there are systemic barriers that we have created to allowing corporations to be purpose-driven, and they really have to fight hard not to be maximizing short-term profits. And we are training people in our business schools to be thinking about maximizing short-term profits. It seems to me that if we're going to have this conversation about trusted leadership in business and society, this broader conversation about what the systemic constraints are is the one that we need to be having in order that we can get to the point that there is some potential for us to be trusting in the benevolence of these institutions. So I wanted to throw that out for your thoughts.
Angie, did you want to respond specifically on the question of how the corporate sector positions itself?
There were multiple questions, so I will comment maybe later on specifically about profit and corporations.
Thank you. I hate to be a bore because I think this is a really fascinating conversation, but my watch says 5 to 5, and I understand we're on quite a tight time limit. Do we have time for just some concluding observations from the panel? Because I don't want the other penny is giving me the eye, okay? So when the other penny gives me the eye, I have to check. So we do actually have an opportunity for the panelists to make some final observations and to respond to either the questions that have been raised at the outset. So just to go back to that trust in the family, ways of building trust differing across countries, ways that governments consider that. What do you do in crisis situation? And Anne's point about how do you get the concept of shared value engineered more broadly into the way that the corporate sector approaches its engagement with the community. So I will leave it to the panelists one by one.
Well, let me just bring what Anne's saying into some kind of perspective. I feel that, we exist in different parts of the society, whether it's business, government, or academia, and NGOs, for example, the social sector. We all coming together in an integrated way to build a society for the benefit of the people. And therefore, some benevolence has to be there. Without having those kind of things behind, it will be hard to keep the society together, integrated and wholesome. The sub-part of that, like family institution that being addressed, is part of that social fabric that is in a smaller unit inside. They also have to flow in together. But because the breakdown is so much these days, and in the old days, the family units are much more there for social insurance. Now we have smaller family, and it's no longer the family unit which is as pressing for helpful for social insurance. Therefore, it's trying to migrate that kind of whole work more to the state. And hence, the state have a heavy responsibility in this day and age where everyone look at. And others are the participatory in this process. And therefore, now it's getting harder and harder because the state are in question. Democracy, which is a key word that is being used today, are in question. There's deficit going on everywhere in form and essence. And therefore, we are going through a flux right now in the entire world. That's why trust factor is so low in every way. And like in Thailand, I mentioned, every institutions where the trust factor is so low, except the academia, which is not quite tainted fully yet. It will come. Whenever the academia are not doing their work and just speaking whatever their minds say without some credible integrity, eventually they too will be questioned. And therefore they are just trying to grasp to some lifeline in a society where no one they can turn to. And in Thailand, fortunately, there's still some segment of academia that is well trusted. And hence, it's a lifeline, in a way, in a society which is hoping, looking for solution. But I don't think Thailand is unique in that way. You can see the entire world, what we're going through right now, in some different degrees. And therefore, the trust factors that we talk about is a very important issue.
Thank you very much. Professor?
Yeah, try to be brief. I wish we had another 30 minutes, but we don't. I think whether you trust an academic or not, at least I can say that in Singapore, depends on whether what the academic says confirms what you want to hear or not. And that is because many of us operate through a confirmatory bias, right? You only attend to certain newspaper articles, you talk to people who share your own views rather than people who oppose your views. And I say that again, not as a joke, but as a science, because what happens is that we look at trust, we focus on what it should be, what it ought to. We forgot what is actually happened. To understand what is actually happened, you need to understand how people feel, people think, and how people behave. You need to collect data. You need to understand the psychology of it. This is going to be controversial. I think the way to increase trust, if you just focus on the trustee, that means the government, let's say, the trustworthiness, you are in trouble. Okay? If you think that the only way to increase trust and you should focus all your effort to increase your trustworthiness, I think you are in trouble. Because that's not how trust perception operates. Just because you're objectively trustworthy doesn't mean you'll get the trust that you ought to get. Because when people decide to trust you or not, there's a whole host of psychological factors. So if you do not go down and understand how people think, feel, and behave, the psychological factors, you're only focusing on one thing, which is your own trustworthiness. And the research is crystal clear. Your objective trustworthiness is not the same as the trust perceptions that you get. Singapore's government is highly trustworthy from an objective point of view. But the trust perception of the government seems to be, at least by some surveys, maybe a mismatch with the trustworthiness. And that's because we are looking for different things and so on. So I think that is very important. And that relates to the ambassador's point about the trust going forward. That it actually doesn't occur in a vacuum. Trust is not an event-based, it's actually relationship-based. Whether I trust Penny or not, it's not just what she said to me, but that if I remember what she said previously, what she did, that affects the whole trust. So how government reacts, how you then do whether you call it PR, engagement, conversation, whatever, is highly critical because the time that you really need the trust is what Elias said, that when a crisis happens, you don't have time to build trust at that time. So I would just say that the government, not only the government should do less, because I like what Clinton does. Because sometimes you do less, you're better than doing more. By not interfering in certain things, actually your likability, your trustworthiness will sometimes go up. So I think social innovation, things like this kinds of things, whether it's 3P or more independent, are highly critical. And NGOs and civil society can flourish within a sensible way according to its own cultural norms.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I think your point is very, very valid. So for the industry, many of the industry, of course, all of the industry has their own stakeholders. Same as the pharma industry. So, for example, for pharma industry, who are the stakeholders? Most important, patient. We have a mission to care and cure the patient. That is, for me, also for the company and industry, most important mission we are having. And also commitment. At the same time, we are having regulators, we are having politicians, so we also have shareholders, we have a very different, diverse and various stakeholders who has also different needs from their side. So it is the somehow commitment, or it is our responsibility to try to meet all different needs from the stakeholders. So, but each industry has their own different type of stakeholders. But at the end of the day, what is common for all the industry, across the industry, is at least we have to make sure to survive. So that's why I was maybe too much generalizing that company has to make a money. But in fact, if we see specifically about each industry, they have maybe bigger mission they want to deliver, and same for pharma industry. So that's why, because of diverse nature of the stakeholder and also their needs in each specific industry, I brought the point of integrity of the company and industry. Because without having a strong integrity in the industry and the company, your other purpose can also override any other purpose, which can be or defeat the purpose of the company. That's why, as I mentioned, in the healthcare, we not only look at the shareholder, but also we have to look at what other things we can contribute to the community. Hence, we can continuously build the trust. So I cannot really generalize this one to other industry, but at least that's how I see pharma industry, and also the integrity part becomes very important in the industry.
Yes, I would say that in basically all sectors we touched today, the core issue is basically the same, being in politics, in diplomacy, which is kind of an expression of politics of international level, in the business, in the academia, in civil society, on this issue of trust and confidence. I think worldwide people believe and have trust in persons, institutions, governments, when they do what they say, what they promised before, when they do it also well, obviously, but they do it well perhaps in a way that it is not only in their own specific sector interest, and this is not only now, I'm talking about business, which then the lady said rightly, is perhaps today in many areas too much profit driven, as I mentioned also with the salary issue. But you do it in a way which is really including also other sectors of being society or of civic life, and then it is quite likely that it is these persons or institutions, they can gain the trust and keep also the trust of their constituencies. And it's really, and I perhaps I'm personally not Catholic, so I can say it easily. But let's just mention, for example, the Pope, the new elected Pope, Franciscus, who very quickly, just with a few gestures, but then also with his attitude, gained the first very strong trust by many of his constituencies and perhaps even all over the world. Obviously, now he has to deliver and see that he can do many of the things he promised, which I'm optimistic partly. But this shows that really authenticity and integrity, as Professor mentioned, these are areas where they are important for all the different sectors, and if people and institutions follow these rules strictly, with some openness for the rest of their own sector, then I think things can be accepted well by the society. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are unfortunately out of time, but I would like to say a huge thank you to this panel. I think it's been a fabulously interesting discussion, from pharma to the Pope, politics to psychology, and back again. So I hope that everybody has taken something from this, but I think that all of our panelists have given very freely of their opinions, given very freely of their thoughts, and really, given us a fantastic set of insights this afternoon. So please join me in thanking them.
Wonderful idea. Wonderful idea. This, Penny, is one of those panel discussions, normally we go, not what the time is, but I don't know about everyone else, but I was sitting there going, I wish this could continue, right? So, once again, can we please thank our panel and the last thing today. Thank you, and particularly to our chair, Penny, and we want everybody to stand up, not you, but everybody here, because we have this sort of applause for the plenary free panel. Well done, guys. Over to you, Nicholas.
Thanks very much. That was not embarrassing at all. That's had it easy. Good morning, everyone. As it was kindly revealed, the lateness is due to me. I do apologize. Well, on behalf of the number of cars in small roads. But we do have a very exciting panel today, and it's great to see so many people here. And also a very warm welcome to all members of the panel. We'll jump right into it. I think the discussion that we're going to have today is particularly relevant to a lot of young societies, modern societies in the world today. For example, Singapore in a lot of instances. But I think the experiences in other parts of the world are also going to be very relevant. So we've assembled a panel that will hopefully share a breadth of knowledge across a few different markets, in a few different sectors as well. And at the same time, hopefully deepen the discussion that we can have afterwards in the Q&A format to hear from you guys as well. Social capital and the speed of trust. It's not at the speed of light, it's at the speed of trust. The two concepts that are integrated into that particular topic today are, again, as I mentioned, very relevant. Social capital is something that we're discussing a lot more these days, trying to define, trying to broaden the awareness, and trying to make people understand, A, what it is, B, the significance and importance. The Singapore President Tony Tan mentioned a few days ago in a speech at the SGI lecture at the Bulletin. He was talking about social reserves and contrasting that with financial capital reserves of a country. And that's definitely something that pertains to this idea of social capital. Building capital and the speed of trust. I think the idea of bonds and relationships between people, between colleagues, between institutions, between individuals and institutions, between the society and the government. These are things that are often discussed, more so in this day and age than ever before. And I think that one idea that hopefully we'll, and I'm pretty sure we will hear about it from our panelists, is how social media, social networks and technology have actually impacted on the way that trust is built. This idea of a kampong versus a cyber village, the idea of neighborhood stores moving on to the online marketplace, and the relationships that people, consumers, individuals have with these kind of institutions that are no longer bricks and mortar but are more virtual, and the impact this can have on new businesses and the way current businesses do their work and move on. I'll let each of our panelists share their thoughts on this topic, maybe very briefly, just to run through once again the panelists that we have. To my immediate right is Mr. Ole Brook, who's Regional Director, Asia Pacific of Airbnb, a very interesting, exciting upcoming company, which I'm sure he'll share a bit more about in his presentation. We have Mr. Charlie Ma, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Deloitte, Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific, to Ole's right. And to Charlie's immediate right is Ms. Anne Lalin, the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations, Southeast Asia and Greater China at Google Asia Pacific. And on the other side of the panel, Mr. Amhat Singh, who is the Chief Executive Director of the People's Association here in Singapore. Without much further ado, I'll turn over now to Ole, and each of our panelists will speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll kick off into a more interactive discussion. Ole, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I represent a company called Airbnb, and first actually, to tell you how deep I went is, how many of you have heard about Airbnb before? Can I just get a quick show of hands? Oh, that's a decent amount. I'll give you a quick overview. So Airbnb is a trusted community marketplace. It's a peer-to-peer rental platform. So it consists on one side of people renting out their extra space, whether that be an extra room, an apartment, houseboat, tree houses, castles, villas, whatever it is. And on the other side, we have travelers. People are looking for a clean, comfortable, convenient place to stay. And we, Airbnb, have a technology platform that enables people to book it. And just to give you a sense of scale, Airbnb was started in 2008 in San Francisco. Today, 2013, we have 500,000 properties on our platform. And if you think about that, that has happened over the last 5 years, which is quite incredible. And it started in an apartment in San Francisco. Our founders, Brian, Joe, and Nate, they had a basic problem. They couldn't make ends meet. They didn't have enough money to pay rent. What they did have is that they had an apartment, a place where they had ample space. So they thought, well, if you can't make ends meet, as entrepreneurs, what do we do? So they invited people to stay with them, they list their space on our website, and they blew up some mattresses, air mattresses, because they didn't have beds. So instead of opening a bed and breakfast, they opened an air bed and breakfast, hence the name Airbnb. And people came in here and they stayed with them. There was 3 people staying with them, and after 3 nights, they actually moved in. But also people asked them when they left, when can I do this next somewhere else? And this is really where the idea about Airbnb was born. And that was kicking off what we call the sharing economy. The fact that people are willing to share their assets rather than own assets themselves, and take part in experiences rather than having ownership of things. And if you think about this concept, the fact that you would go and stay in someone's home rather than staying in, for instance, a traditional accommodation at a hotel. That says a lot about the way we think about trust today and the way we think about sharing experiences. And that's all enabled, I would say, a lot by technology and a rapid development of technology. So if you go back to the 90s and the first wave of the internet, it was all really about getting people online and also getting people to transact online. So the first iteration of the internet was companies like Amazon, which I think you all know. The second iteration of the internet was really about making the web social. We had companies like MySpace, Facebook, which is probably the most famous one, and companies like Instagram, which is the most recent one we came of social and connecting people. And the third wave and the third iteration of the internet, which I would say Airbnb is part of, is what we call online-offline integration. And that online-offline integration is basically happening when people are connecting online. They are making a transaction, so they're paying someone, they're booking a room through the internet, they're meeting offline. And that's a whole new and different set of us to interact than we've done before. And if you think about that, if I've told you about this idea, probably in the 90s, you would say, I'm crazy. But today, there's 9 million people that has tried Airbnb. And the reason that people have actually bought into this idea is that we build trust into the platform. And it couldn't have happened without people going through the situations. They got used to using credit cards. They got used to connecting online, seeing other people's profiles, learning about them online. And now they take it into the real world. And what Airbnb has done as a technology platform is as a building trust into the platform. So we leverage all the assets that we have across people's social graphs. So people connect through Facebook. So you can read about them, you can read about the person who's staying with. You can read previous reviews. So if Anne would have stayed with me in Copenhagen, when I lived in Copenhagen, Anne could leave a review of me as a person and tell me, who am I, what do I do? And I could also leave a review about Anne and say, what was my experience with Anne? And by adding that layer of transparency that technology enables, we have been able to build trust so rapidly that today, 175,000 people will be staying in an Airbnb tonight. I think that says a lot about the speed of trust. Thank you.
Thanks very much. There's definitely some interesting topics. I have a friend who's chairman of a large institution, runs some things, very significant things, businesses in Singapore, and he asked me last week, I kid you not, have you used Amazon before? Is it safe to use Amazon? And I had no idea how to respond to that. But it's a generational thing. He's obviously a little bit older, and I think the way people perceive businesses are definitely changing in the way the Airbnb and other companies like that have been represented. We'll turn now to Charlie, perhaps, to share some ideas.
Maybe before I start, I'll tell you an interesting story about Amazon, because as many of you know, who use Amazon to buy books and so on, the story of Amazon and the success of Amazon over all these years is that some years back they went with Borders and said to Borders, look, I got this cool platform where they help you sell books, you have to set up so many bookstores and it costs you a lot of money to rent bookstores and so on, and Borders basically said, we know what we're doing. We've been selling books all these years, don't come and talk to me. And guess what? Borders is in history, and Amazon is still in business. And I asked this guy about, so seeing how successful Amazon is today, I'm sure someday somebody's going to come up with a business model that's going to disrupt Amazon business. It was an interesting question, interesting discussion. And guess what? What the guy said to me was very interesting. He says, it's very hard to disrupt Amazon's business because they keep disrupting themselves, because they keep thinking about new things, they keep changing their business model and so on. So that was an interesting Amazon story. But coming back to what we do with Deloitte, as you know, we work with financial consulting, advisory, audit, tax, and so on. And so our experience is social capital is that certainly over the years, we start to see that our people actually expect us to do something in this area, particularly young ones. They are all socially connected, and they expect you to be that way too. So in terms of building our own social capital, what was very important for us was actually to continue to connect with our people just through this mechanism. And today, we actually do a lot of recruitment through the social media network. We use Facebook, we use LinkedIn, we actually use Facebook to help us check background information on people and so on. So for those of you who've got fancy Facebook posting and you're looking for a job, just be careful what you post on your Facebook, because recruiters today just go on Facebook to go and check what you've been doing and where you've been on holidays and so on and so forth. So we actually make use of a lot of those tools to actually help us in our entire human resources, human capital agenda. And what is also more interesting is as things evolve, and more recently with the concept of cloud, crowdsourcing, and so on, we're starting to see a lot of our advisory business, our consultants today, crowdsource what they're doing. And it is a concept that is new, And when you start to crowdsource for solutions to provide to your client, there's a lot of need to make sure that those solutions are actually good solutions and they can be trusted. So we actually go through this process of ensuring that we crowdsource a solution for our client, that we actually make sure that it goes through our quality test. So it's actually changed the entire game of how we advise clients, because it used to be you hire good consultants, you hire subject matter experts who knows about a particular industry, and then you advise your clients. But today, you just look around, a lot of consultancy and advisory around the firm basically crowdsource for some of this solution, because there's just a lot of information out there, a lot of experts out there. They don't have to work for you, they all just provide helping you provide a solution for your client. So that's just from the business front, but this thing around social media, socially connected is basically just here to stay. Today, Ole spoke about Facebook as well. Today, you look at globally, about 50% of the internet users are on Facebook. In Singapore, we are slightly less, we are about 40+%. But guess what? More than 50% of Singaporeans are on Twitter. So you are in the balance of the 50%, so you better get onto the bandwagon. And if you look at in Asia, amongst Asian companies, 9 out of 10 Asian companies today have a Facebook account. And about 2/3 of them would have Twitter presence as well. China today, globally, the most socially connected country in the world. 84% of the Chinese internet users are socially connected. So you look at all this trend, and then back to this question around, so with all this interaction, the concept of friends, your friend, is totally different these days. Nicholas spoke about the kampong and the villages and so on, and in the old days you make friends because they're from your own kampong and from your own village. You make friends because they're from your own schools, your own colleagues, they are your friends. But today the concept of friends is totally different, because they're just all out there. And Deloitte did a survey recently about the increasing trend of how people make friends just through games, online games, internet games. And today, for all of you who play Scrabbles online, you actually play against somebody. It's not just playing on your own anymore, you're playing against somebody and you make friends. So there's just a whole series of online games today where you basically create new friends that you don't really know. And so the concept of friends is totally different. And when you have this sort of environment, the need to build trust becomes ever more important. And therefore, for companies that has got website, or Facebook and so on, it's just very important for you to think of that as being really no different to setting up a storefront. When you set up a shop front, you make sure that it looks good, you make sure that it looks professional, you make sure that it's easy to use. Customers come in, they could get to the product quite easily. All these things you need to really think about as you put up your website and your Facebook page, and to make sure that it's easy for people to navigate and get the information that they want. So basically, you really need to think about it as being not much different from the storefront. It needs to be professional, it needs to be reliable, credible, don't oversell, and ease of use is actually one of the most important factors. There was an interesting survey done by Nielsen recently about what you can trust when you look at information and media and so on. And guess what? When they survey, they actually surveyed some 25,000 people over some 30 countries around the world. And they asked them, what sort of medium or media would you trust the most? So there are 4 categories. You trust completely, trust somewhat, or don't trust much, or don't trust at all. Basically, those are the 4 categories that you have to respond to. And guess what? I mean, the traditional means of relying on what your friends tell you had the highest rating in terms of level of trust. So the one that got the most vote was that I will trust something that someone that I know tells me. And that had something like 92% of the respondents says that they will trust completely or trust somewhat if they hear an opinion from a friend that they know. And there's only 8% that says they don't trust that much or don't trust at all. And the second highest rank was for customer opinion posted online. The customer opinion posted online had 70% of the respondents saying that they trust completely or trust somewhat. And then 30% say they don't trust much or they don't trust at all. So it's interesting that when you look at some of the social media and to build up your own social capital, that you have to rely on some of this customer posting online because people do believe in customer posting online to the tune of 70%. And guess what had the lowest rating? Can anyone guess? So lowest ranked in terms of level of trust was text ad on your mobile phone. So all of you carry mobile phone. I'm sure every so often you get this text advertisement that's pushed to your mobile phone, and what do? You immediately click the delete button. So those are the ones that people trusted the least. So they only had 29% of people saying that they trust completely or trust somewhat, and 71% saying that they don't trust it at all. And then the second worst or lowest ranking was basically again online ad on mobile devices. Not much different from the mobile app. They were like 33% saying that they trust it, and 67% saying that they don't trust. So I think there's a message there that whatever you do, you've got to make sure that whatever you put on your web and connect socially, they really need to be credible, professionally done, ease of use, so that you can build the level of trust and comfort. Ultimately, whatever you do through all this online shopping and social networking and so on, that it is the experience that counts. Even in his business, that just that experience of going up to the net, the ease of booking a room, and then ultimately the experience of actually staying in the premises. I think all those will help you build the social capital that you need. So let me just stop there.
Thank you. As a journalist, as a former journalist, I'm very thankful you say that the lowest trusted source is mainstream media, Straits Times or Channel News. I'm glad it was a text ad. Thank you very much, Charlie. I think there's some very interesting ideas there. We can explore a little bit more in the Q&A. Turn on to Anne to share some perspectives from a Google perspective or from your own personal experience.
Sure. So, as mentioned before, I do government relations work for Google Asia. And already I'm going to have to work to build your trust because I'm not going to fit your perception, probably, what a Google employee should be. First of all, because I am, in fact, this is the truth, the oldest human being working for Google in Singapore. and we think I'm the oldest in Asia, but we're not quite sure yet. And so I'm looking closely. I haven't found anyone older yet. And I'm not very technical. So since I'm not meeting expectations, I'm going to have to work a little bit harder here on trust. So what I thought I'd do is just talk a little bit about how Google views some things about how we operate and maybe how those are applicable to social enterprises. So we know that we're in a space that's highly competitive. We actually think that highly competitive space is really good for us, right? Because it keeps us on our toes. So we know there's a lot of different email options you have. There are lots of different search tools. There are lots of different browsers you can use. There's a wealth of phone operating systems that you could choose to use. But we've made the choice along the way is to operate in an open system that lets people move easily from our products. And we think that makes us work better because we have to be at the top of our game. We have to constantly innovate. We have to be like Amazon and constantly disrupt ourselves to stay ahead. And we make it a step further because one of the things we say is, we say if you want to leave Gmail, which of course you never would, but if you did, you can take all of your contacts, all of your email, everything with you. You can constantly take, we have a whole unit of engineers called the Data Liberation Army at Google. And their entire job is to go through our products and make sure that they're engineered so that if somebody wants to leave, they can walk out. Now, we do that because philosophically, founders believe that kind of openness is essential to our being. But we also do it because I think that we send a message when we're that confident that we don't have to tie you to us, that maybe we're a little more trustworthy. But also, it adds that added dimension that we better be trustworthy. And it's, we're very, very conscious of that. And then further, deep loyalty to my company. But the most annoying phrase at Google for me is the don't be evil motto, which strikes me as a stunningly low threshold. Okay, and everyone at Google would say, yes, that's a stunningly low threshold. We actually, our desire is to actually be good, not just not evil. So knowing that, that we really need to, we've already said we're holding ourselves to a different standard. We're trying to be a different kind of company. We want you to be able to trust when you search with us that you're getting the full, that first of all, that we've got great algorithms that are going to get you the best possible answer to your question, but that it's not skewed by politics or popularity or impressing power. And we do that. So we're just trying to build that trust. Now, I think in a similar way, if you've defined yourself as a social enterprise, you've already held yourself up to a higher standard. Because if you just said, look, I'm an enterprise that's goal is to make money, and then, if I make money, I'm going to give it to a good cause, you're nice. But you said, I'm a social enterprise. And so that my goal is bigger. I'm holding myself to a higher standard. I need to hold your trust better. I can less afford to make a mistake. Or I certainly can less afford to make a mistake and not be completely transparent about that mistake. So I think that we have that in common. It is a blessing and a curse, but I think far more a blessing. So hopefully we can explore some of those ideas if they're interesting to you.
Great, thanks so much, and I think, definitely we got some I'm sensing some philosophical questions that could come up based on what the speakers have touched on, drawn from their very practical experiences. So we'll let Mr. Hak Seng to take the floor for a short while to share some ideas from the People's Association perspective before we delve into some questions.
Thank you, Nicholas. Brothers and sisters, People Association jobs is very simple. It's to bring people together so that the outcome is that it's a society that we care for each other. Easier said than done. Why? Because the world has changed and changed very fast. The world used to be quite a homogeneous world, but if you look at today, stakeholders become more and more heterogeneous. Needs also start to entrench, but more importantly, some of the needs, in fact, are in conflict. So the question is, how do we bring people while we have different needs and the needs are in conflict? So in People Associations, what we like to say ourselves, our job is to bring the government closer to the people closer to the people, and the people closer to the government. Now, government closer to the people. Previously, many years ago, the job is quite easy. It's basically telling people that this is good for you. And then you go to Nicholas Fang, go to the mainstream media, and then just say this is good. But in today's context, if you want to build trust, it's not only telling people that it's good for you. You need to carry and make sure that you can carry the ground to sell it to the policy. So that's a big shift. A shift from telling to carrying the policy. So people to government, that becomes very fundamental shift in order to build trust. The next fundamental shift I thought I'd like to tell you is people to people. People to people relationship is, in the past again, is about bringing people, and that's organized events, that's organized activities, so that we better understand each other. So we celebrate together. But is it enough in today's multi-stakeholder context? I think the answer is very obvious, it's not. Therefore, the shift is beyond bringing people together to understand each other, to people bring together to do solutioning. Co-solutioning becomes very important. Co-creation. So that at the end of the day, the solutions may not be the best, but at least you know what is the trade-off because you co-created the solutions. And more importantly, the solution create the ownership. So that really. The third part of the equation, of course, is people to government. People to government is about the trust that your voice will be heard. But the challenge is whose voice will be heard. Is it the voice of the noisy minority or is it the voice of the silent majority? And that's difficult. Because authority needs to balance in order to voice it. So these are the shifts in people business, in building social capitals. But to compound that, since we are talking about new media, I pose 3 challenges to you, and then after that we can have a dialogue. And the first challenge is this. With the introduction of new media, one voice can bring down the institutions. Just one voice will do that. A good example is, you all must have read the paper. This is regarding to one voice, and the airline staff made a comment to a passenger. A racist comment, actually. It went viral. It almost bring down the entire airline. The second part I thought I would throw to you regarding to new media is that in new media, it travels in warp speed. For those of you who watch Star Trek, you know what I mean. In calculated, it's about 5 seconds, whatever you put in go around the world. And once it go around the world, you can never take it up. Warp speed. So that complicates trust building. And the third part is, in the internet world, you don't know who you're dealing with. There's a lot of uncertainty. And you need to deal with this uncertainty in all this. So I sketched a shift in people business, but I've compounded it with the new media. Perhaps we can have a chit chat on that. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Ang. Thank you very much for making my life easier because you summed up some of the tensions between the ideas that have come out so far. Before we throw it open to the floor, maybe I'll do this one with this privilege. I've got a few different points and I'll try to use one gigantic question and throw it open to anyone on the panel to share some ideas. We've heard a little bit about how technology that is trust-enabled, like Airbnb, like even using Amazon, where you have to trust the technology, you have to be willing to put your credit card information out there. You know, there are still amazingly a lot of people who are very concerned about putting personal information, credit card information online, even with respected brands like Amazon, and they're terrified that their bank accounts will be wiped clean, or they'll get a $500,000 credit card bill or something like that. So we've had the issue of technology based on trust, but can technology actually build trust? And Ole, you mentioned a little bit about this idea of technology being a platform where you can gain more information about people. Charlie, you also mentioned that. How much of that is going to be a concern if you consider abuse of that sort of system of fake information being put out there? The darker side of cyberbullying, for example, or people using the internet for to mask their identities and to do certain activities that are not so desirable. How much of that then becomes a potential point of conflict, that something that's supposed to build trust is actually abused in that sense? I guess that moves into a more technical discussion about security and how we can enforce that. As a related point to that, if you're talking about more people being on Facebook, and very interestingly, we see more and more government officials using social media, Facebook, to a certain extent, Twitter, I suppose, to share views. And I've heard personally that some of them are wondering. They said everything I post on Facebook becomes a news item. The media will pick it up, and it is reported as if it's almost like a policy announcement. You know, but it's not. I'm just sharing, my views about different issues. And then at the same time, when they want to make an official announcement, they'll put it down there and they say, why isn't anybody paying attention? I can make an announcement as well. So it's how to use that persona online, and statements and views aside, how much of it can be tapped upon to create, as Mr. Ang mentioned, this bond between the people and the government to show a very personal side. I mean, social media, with photographs or whatever I had for breakfast, and what new clothes I bought, is a very real and personal thing, and it allows this idea of a trusted profile online, for example, to create positive outcomes for themselves and for the society. And I guess that comes to the last point that Mr. Ang sort of talked about a little bit about how much of this, the benefits that we see from the internet, the speed, the connectivity, and the huge reach that we have can actually compromise or enhance this building of social capital. And Mr. Ang also mentioned that in the past the government would make a decision and then come to the mainstream media. I have to say that we do report other things as well besides what the government said. So to clarify that. So those are some ideas. I'm trying to touch on a few key points. I don't know if anybody would like to share a perspective on that.
Yeah, I actually think that, that, as you said, look, information moves out there quickly and moves out widely. And there was sort of an implication that there's this possibility that this bad information is multiplied. But the reality is, yes, that's true. And, there's a dark side of human nature that we somehow really just, I think, bad news and gossip. But the reality is it also, there's an enormous ability to correct that information. So it's a great challenge because a businessman, a political figure, somebody will get checked more, right? And so, it's painful. And there's incorrect information out there, but it actually can be moved away. And you can watch this sort of, in the sort of algorithms of search. So where a news story comes out, it's kind of inaccurate, it's a big story, you start searching for the term, that's the story at the top. Hours later, or maybe days later, that false story has been discounted. Now when you put in the search term, the false story is down about number 10, and it's 9 things on top of it, evaluators more correct, that are saying, that was wrong, right? There's all sorts of ways to get information that corrects. So yes, the danger is information goes out. But I don't think it's also much different than, compound culture. You knew in your neighborhood, in your family, that, this auntie's a more reliable source of family information than that one. And you begin to realize that your friends on Facebook, some are more reliable than others. And so it works it out. So I'm sure that, in the Airbnb context, all those reviews matter, but most consumers of Airbnb have the ability to say, well, he got 10 great reviews, 2 bad. Those bad, unless those happen to be from people I know and trust, right? And so I think that the fact of the matter is, it's really painful when you're called on stuff, but the system does allow actually perhaps a greater correction of that than we give it credit for.
And I think just to touch upon that, first of all, I think that there is opportunity to spread misguided information, but I do think that first of all, companies like Google makes us sort through that information. We can find that information and we can evaluate it. When we see all the platforms we have today, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have LinkedIn, and we can triangulate from a lot of this work. So I think that adds a lot of visibility, right? And I think it was a bigger challenge before when you had online communities, discussion forums, and people had nicknames. They didn't actually use the offline persona online. But what is happening today is that you see to a great extent that there's full transparency. You know the full name of the person. You know where they work. You know their opinions because you read it on Twitter. And that keeps people accountable for their opinions. It keeps people accountable for their actions. And we've taken that and we integrated it into our platform and said, like, when people transact, they can leave review for each other. And when they say that, then that adds another layer because they say, hey, I actually met this person and he stayed with me in my home. And that's one of the most intimate things you can do. And on top of that, there's a commercial transaction. So if you can convince people by using a layer that is online, and then you get another layer which is offline, and you build trust that way. I think there's no limitations in the way we can extend that. So far this year, we had 70 people from 70 different nationalities staying in a single city at one night. Imagine if you get every single nationality traveling to every
every single other country in the world. What does that mean for us as a global, well, as a world, when people get to meet each other and build trust in person? So I think that there's just an incredible amount of opportunity ahead of us with online-offline education.
So I'm just going to chip in on this, these 10 good comments, 8 good comments and 2 bad comments. And, it is interesting in that, I just make a point earlier on that, among that in the Nielsen survey, that one of the things that ranked highly was customer feedback posted online. And basically people read that and they look at that, and 70% thought that it was quite reliable, and 30% sort of didn't believe it. But we just got to be very careful, because we also know that there are companies out there, the brand managers, who are very, very clever doing some of this, where they've got brand ambassadors basically paid to write good comments. So as a result, that there's also a notion that perhaps when people go online, they tend to look at some of the good comments and then very quickly skip through the rest, but focus on the negative, because every time there's a negative, because the negative comments has a tendency to be more true than the positive. So there's also an interesting phenomena in this exchange as well, because when there's a negative comment, they say, well, maybe not, right? So you got to be careful with some of those. But I think it's a challenge, because obviously people can say what they want to say, and you just got to deal with that. But one of the things that we found also was the speed of response. Rather than keeping quiet and not responding or trying to post something up, I think the speed of posting something to basically explain the situation, I think is very important, because that also helps to build trust. Because when you don't interact and you don't engage, they're going to think that, well, what has been posted, the most recent posting is perhaps correct, and that's why you didn't say anything. So it's important to respond. And I don't know how you deal with this thing about minister engaging in Facebook versus policies and so on, but I think you could use Facebook to help you achieve your business objective. If, as an example, if somebody perceives a minister to be somebody who's very stern, not engaging, and they could actually use the Facebook to project the personal side of the person, and it actually helps you, in your business dealing to achieve a certain objective. I think that's a good way to use some of the social media and engage your stakeholders.
I study with great interest how people can create social movement through the internet. Because for that movement to take place, there must be a lot of trust between them. Of course, there is a cost. But it's easier said than done, because physically, when I say there's a cost, you can see my body language, you can see me, you can feel me, you can touch me. But in the internet, you can't. But yet, what pull people together so committed to the cost? So I narrowed down to 3 interesting points. And I think there's great lessons to use it for the purpose of creating trust in the internet. The first point is that whatever go to the net, it must be what I call emotion appealing rather than information based. I can put a picture of, say, buy a product, or I can put a picture of a customer expression of his view of the products. 2 different things. 2 different things. And you look at the YouTube that get the highest traction, not the propaganda, not the advertisement YouTube. No one will just delete it. But it's the one that how it become a life-changing experience. So that's the first point. The first point is that emotional anchoring in the messaging is very. The other part about I thought about the movement is that it's not only about the network. In the internet, it's about network on network. It's about leveraging the network. The better you are in leveraging the network, the bigger trust you will create. So that is another interesting way of how people create social movement. Of course, the third one is about what I call, you must know what is the rule of the game. The rule of the game in the internet world is that you must be able to differentiate between what is opinion and what is information. If you jump too quickly on opinion, you get exercise. But if you react to facts clarify facts, that is a different dimension. So the ethics of in the internet is also. So I thought this 3 point of how to create trust in the internet world is interesting. I thought that's a share.
Because I just want to add on to that very first point. That is, you know, if you think about how you build trust, and today when I interact with you in person, I eyeball you, I see the way you talk and the confidence when you talk to me about your product and so on. I can get a sense on whether I can trust you or not. And so when we did some survey around how to build trust in this socially connected platform, it is true that the advice was a video is always better than an audio without video. So you have to build trust, you actually put in a video clip of the product or of somebody talking about the product and so on, because then the customer could eyeball you and look at the body language and say, this is something that's really cool and something that I believe in. So video always better than audio. Audio obviously much better than, also better than just plain text. So it's something for us to think about as well as you want to build trust through these socially connected platforms. That at the end of the day, it's back to basic, and that is people want to see the person and the product so that they can actually, well, they cannot touch and feel, but at least they could see it. I think that tells a lot more story, and that helps you build trust as well.
Interesting ideas. I think, but in some cases, you know, I see people take selfies of themselves. I'm not sure if I want to touch that. But I think it's, we've got some very interesting ideas. One example that I wanted to share before I open up for Q&A is that when I was in Myanmar a couple of months ago, and talking to some of the government servants about how they get information out. As you know, in Myanmar, opening up very rapidly. Old reputation is, of course, junta control, state control, very, very slow, and in some cases, any sort of anti-town but they are quite concerned for information coming out as government spokesperson. Using a lot of Facebook to get information. And every day he will come out on Facebook and make a clarification about the hottest topic of the day. If there's some information and you're saying was incorrect, he would use Facebook to say, what you're hearing, that's not really the case. This is actually what we're doing. Still very much a government position, but the information goes much quicker. And at that time, he had 120,000 fans on his page, and it was growing by the day. So it's amazing to see how these sort of ideas are permeating throughout the world, not just in developed markets in the West or more sophisticated economies like Singapore. So it's fascinating to see how that will evolve. We have about half an hour for Q&A, right on time. And I'd like to open it to the floor now. Perhaps a question, quick identification of yourself and some of the views that you would have. We have one question here first, the gentleman over there, and somebody in the center. So let's start here first, please.
My name is Ed Bozan. I'm from Bogai, RSVP Bogai. I don't hear this this topic about age and generation raised in this adoption of technology, because in the continuum of acceptance versus rejection, yesterday in one of the breakup sessions, one of the speakers said that his father-in-law still believes in the stash of cash in the mattress and nothing else. And the other end of it is complete family. So, but is there an age or generational relationship in this trusting whether a person trusts or not these media? And the other thing is that I was one of those who put up my hand about Airbnb, right? And I was exposed to this a month ago. And that was because a friend of mine asked me to look for accommodation for him who's coming here for holiday next month. When I looked through all the Airbnb, again, I wrote back to him on an email to say, I don't trust this. Right? And that's because the photographs that I see of the properties, I realized that when I went through a lot of properties, the photograph of the kitchen looked all the same. For some reason, I was like, I don't know if this was an oddity or a necessity. things that us older folks don't relate very well to the so-called new technology. So I just
Thank you. Maybe I'll let Molly have first
Oh,
right of
well, no,
response.
actually, you know what? I'm going to save your Airbnb story here. I've spent the last month flat hunting here. I'm going to tell you, there are only 2 kitchens in flats in Singapore. I've seen hundreds, and there are 2 basic types. So I think it could be legitimate pictures of every kitchen, because there's only 2 forms.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think, first of all, actually to touch upon what you mentioned about age, and what is really interesting, when I first tell people about Airbnb, and the first thing they think is, oh, these are, 20-somethings, backpackers traveling around the world. Turns out that our average age is much higher than you think. It's closer to 40 years old. And the typical people who are renting out their space, they're older. Some of them are actually empty nesters, so people who have had kids who moved out and want to open up their homes to host people. So I don't think technology itself is necessarily a barrier. And I think what even was more interesting was that, when we tell people who are maybe in their 40s and 50s about this idea, they might initially be skeptical. But if you tell people who are 70 years old about this, they would say, of course, this is how we used to travel before. We didn't stay in traditional accommodation. We called up a friend. We asked a friend of a friend, could we stay with them? So I think that what actually is happening now is that we're getting again closer to what we did before. Because I think there was a time where we were very focused on price consumption. It was driven by advertising, it was driven by easy access to money. And now it's common change, where we care more about, again, sustainable consumption, using the assets that we have better. And I think that technology has actually enabled us to get back to that. When it comes to Airbnb as such, and your experience browsing flats, Airbnb is, first of all, is an open platform, so people can rent the space they have. One of the things we do to make sure that people have better experiences is actually that we have a network of photographers who comes and take verified pictures for free of your home. So if you're renting your space in New York, if you're renting your space in Amsterdam or in Australia, wherever it is, we have a photographer there, most likely. You can order that for free, and they will actually come and take verified pictures. So when someone here wants to book a place, and it says verified by Airbnb, they actually know this is what they're getting. And that's really important. That is that it is actually a lot about emotions and about what that creates with you. And we understand that pictures is really important to build trust. And if you don't know what you're getting, most likely you won't be booking it.
I think the first time is always the hardest. So, and I make the point around, ultimately you can have the best website, and so on. It is the fulfillment of the order, it is the customer experience that is most important. So I'm sure your friend and the experience the first time and it's a good experience, they will believe in it. I think so. Ultimately, it is still back to basics, brick and mortar. You still got to deliver the goods. You go online shopping, nice website, order the right colors and so on, and it gets delivered on time, the right color, right size. You're gonna feel good about it, and you start to trust the system, and then you're gonna start to do more online shopping. So it is that sort of thing, and I can imagine. I don't think age is a problem. The thing that the late Steve Jobs did a good job of, and that is to invent this thing called the Apple phone. And today you look around, 60-year-old, 70-year-old, 80-year-old, they all use the phone, and they all use smartphones and so on. I think you will come a point in time that it's harder and harder to do things without some of these smartphones. Because you think about the productivity, look at your example. So your friend wants to look for an apartment to rent. You probably have to drive around the whole of Singapore, look at the advertisement, Straits Times advertisement. Go and drive around the whole of Singapore, go and look at them and see whether you think you like the location, like the outside look and so on. And here you just go on that, you can click, and then you can zoom in on, maybe you just look at 2 of them or whatever. So I think it is here to stay, and I think the trust level can be built when you have a first-time good experience. It's very important.
I do think there's a real point about there's a generational gap in the use of technology. And then here, in Singapore, actually, we experience some degree of generational gap because, in fairness, that, the internet is everywhere, connection speed is good, so it becomes generational. But what we do, all new things, right? It's a period of trust, and getting comfortable with something, knowing how to use it better. Then you begin to make better judgments. And one of the things we find in studies around the world, recently in particular study in Australia, is the people who are obviously both skilled at going on the internet and most skilled at discerning truth and falsehood and most skilled at protecting their own identity and safety are actually people between 15 and 20. And actually, this study was looking at children and their parents. I suspect people in their 20s are really good too. But the fact is the parents were far less able to discern, both make good judgments about is this a reliable source than their kids. And more importantly, they had no idea how to protect their online security compared to their kids. And I think but that comes with experience and exposure. And I think kids are learning much of that from their peers who learn valuable lessons. But I think that it will come over time with people. And the other thing to be aware of, and we're talking about Singapore, but when you expand into our Asian neighborhood, the disparity isn't just age, but it's economics and location. And that's actually more troubling, for me more troubling, because there are vast swaths of people who desperately need information and trust, true and trust-based information, who just have no ability to get to it.
Thank you. We'll take a question from the gentleman over here.
Hello, I'm Roy Kun from RSVP. I have 2 points to ask. About trust, okay, one of your, I think Mr. Ma, remarked that the employees are looking on the employees' Facebook to check on them, on their background and whatever. And I think, is the employees to trust the employees? Why are they snooping on their Facebook? I think Facebook is for friends. Employees, I don't think employers like to think that the employees are their friends, or the employees think that the employees are friends. So why are they snooping on the Facebook? I mean, it seems to be a practice that accepted already, but I don't know. I resent this because there is no trust between us now. Okay, I think that Facebook is for friends. So why are employers have the right to do that? Second thing, social enterprise somehow have been held quite highly, in terms of trust. But sometimes when one of the staff or one of the so-called members did wrong, maybe CBD, the reaction from the public is very rapid and very bitter. Okay? And then now, I actually want to ask is that how to handle this type of crisis or this trust crisis to the people who stay on, to continue to fight, to fight for the cause. But the reputation has been wrecked. The whole thing, the whole trust has been collapsed. The donation all dry up already. You cannot get anything. You get lost from me. I don't want to see you. Then how can we salvage? How can we rebuild? Thank you.
Okay, if I can look at the 2 different questions. The first one is the use of information on Facebook to address eventual hires. I guess if you want to compare to the old system where you have references call up basically to talk to people about a particular employee, now you're actually able to find this information. I guess if the information is out there in the public domain, it's you could Google somebody's name and you get a Facebook link. And of course, the second issue of once, as Anne mentioned, easy to lose trust over the internet. And once you've done it, how are you going to reclaim or rebuild that space?
No, I'd say on that Facebook point, I think the point of making, I think we all know that, look, if I'm going to go have a meeting, I put their name in Google search. I might get their Facebook page, I might get their LinkedIn profile, I might get news stories. I learn. Now, the fact of the matter is the way Facebook works, the way LinkedIn works, the way many of these things work, is you can make a choice in the way the excellent Google Plus social network works. Is you can make a choice by how widely you share your information. And I think it's fair play if you decide to share your information with the whole world, then the whole world can see it. And it's available anyway. I think the caution we're trying, that to all of us with children would say is, remember what you put out there is there. And so, if, I have a 21-year-old in college. She's about to graduate. She'll be looking for a job. I would caution her, as I've cautioned her forever. It might be delightful to put pictures of you and your friends out dancing and having a drink on your Facebook page. But boy, who wouldn't expect that a 21-year-old might do that? But show a little bit of judgment, because maybe a potential employer won't be delighted with a full page of drunken dancing girls. And so, you just need to make that judgment. But I also think that as users, we need to, if you're going to make a statement, you need to stand, if you're going to make a public statement, you need to stand by it and understand that's the consequence of it. But use judgment, because if you put it out there, it's out there. I think it's a good thing. I'm, pretty happy to have my statement stand. But
Just let me defend myself. I didn't say that we were snooping on our people. I did say that we do use Facebook for background and reference check when we are recruiting people. I think that's how we have used it a lot. And I think Anne is absolutely right. I mean, this is information that you yourself posted. Nobody asked you to post, and once you post, they become public, and therefore you must be prepared for them to be seen by others. And if they are available publicly, then they are available publicly. How many times I enter into a meeting and people know exactly education background, and what I've done and so on. How do they do that? So Anne is absolutely right. Today, most people, before they go for a meeting, particularly people that do not know, they will go Google, search background, have their assistant print out a few pages and follow to read, and they have full background about you. So these are information that's publicly available. And therefore, I don't think you are impinging on anybody's privacy and so on. But I did say that we use that as a medium to do background check, which is Nicholas' point. I mean, I didn't say that we're stooping on our people. So I don't want a lot of people to think that me, in particular the boss, is actually looking at all their Facebook pages.
Can I add? You make a statement as to why social enterprise attract greater public scrutiny. Rightfully so. Because social enterprise have the larger responsibility to the community beyond the stakeholders. So that's the first point. The second point is how to recover from a crisis, a trust crisis. First, let us ask ourselves, what is the trust formula? Yesterday, in order to prepare, Penny, I had to read out. And then I found a book basically said the trust formula is equal to competency multiplied by integrity multiplied by results. Now, you need to ask yourself which part of this give you confidence. If it's a competency, for example, in the internet, competency on internet means what? You want to sell a product. And before I log into your system, I waited half an hour. This is a competency issue. No trust. Even you got good product also, I won't go in. Wait half an hour, I'm kidding. Who's going to give me faster? Right, so you must know where. The other issue, the other trust level is that is called trust. Value you profess. If your organization profess that in addition to selling a product, you actually support green, you believe in it, sustainability for the world, and then somehow or other your product packaging is about using all those things that you know. Breach of trust, which I'm very familiar with because I'm still a businessman. It's a big issue. How can I trust a social enterprise and a public money to you, people money to you to do something good, and you go and keep it and do it for yourself? It's a big issue. The last part is also very important. Is results. Do you promise and deliver? Do you under-deliver? So to address your crisis issue, must know which part of the component of the trust give you the issue, and then I think the intervention will be appropriate. Because if not, and you go in all over the place, then I think sometimes can be very challenging. So I hope to share with you some of my thinking.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. We have a gentleman in the back. Let's do that first.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Sean. I'm from Halogen Foundation. I have a question to do with generational stuff as well as the use of social media. Because social media is a relatively new thing. Yesterday when I attended one of the breakout sessions talking about the trust equation, it was mentioned that FaceTime, physical FaceTime, is actually something very important. It's kind of irreplaceable. But you have quoted multiple examples when people in their decision-making points do not actually require a physical FaceTime, right? I make a decision based on a photo that I see, whereas in the past I need to meet you before I have that level of trust to make that kind of decision. And you have shared in the past 4 to 5 years social media and how it helps people in its decision-making points, sort of. So do you think in the future the need for actual FaceTime will completely be eliminated as today's digital natives who are very comfortable with social media and they grow up in an environment where decision-making never requires FaceTime as compared to people like us? You know, we are straddling two eras when you talk about the digital age. Yeah, that's my question for you.
So this idea of a transition, I think the interesting point is the transition between generations. I'm not sure whether my generation is considered very wired, but the younger generation certainly is. And whether or not this physical contact becomes less and less important going forward. We use Google Chat in the media a lot of times now. Instead of bringing live guests for TV, we use Google Chat, we use Skype to create that kind of connection.
So it's giving you face-to-face time, so we don't confuse with a branded product. So it gives you so technology can serve the purpose of giving that face-to-face contact when you can't be in the room. I think the reality is that more and more routine commercial transactions will be carried on online than are today. Traditional, I think lot from, purchasing groceries or ordering your books off Amazon, or even, certainly in the U.S. context, everyone buys their car insurance online. Nobody deals with an agent anymore on that. You can compare, you can do all that. But that's an insurance decision that has very little personal in it, right? So it might be very different with life insurance. Of course, we're having exciting news experiences buying our health insurance online. But we'll see. But I think that in theory, what this does, though, is it actually takes these routine transactions, makes them efficiently online, and actually frees us up for more face-to-face time on the important things in our life. So discussing the important social issues, discussing the things that really matter in the world, where you need that personal connection. We now have the time to do that because we actually just didn't have to take the bus for 30 minutes and spend 20 minutes in a line picking up and take 30 minutes back home. Now we can use that personal time for meaningful personal interaction.
Yeah, and I think that, just to continue on that, is that, it's taking the complexity out of the decision and taking the complexity out of anything. And I think that's really the role of technology, is acting as an enabler. And I think that it's difficult to envision, what is the limit of technology? Can we take the complexity out of different negotiations or work projects and all those things? Can we make that commoditized? At the current stage, I doubt it, because there's so much other things going on. I think face-to-face time is still important. You need to get to know people if you want to make good and informed decisions, especially in very complex projects or around complex decisions. The role of technology is really to create as frictionless of an experience as possible, and that's what I think a number of these platforms like Airbnb does, is making it
book someone's home. Before is that you need to read a classified, you need to actually meet people, you didn't actually have pictures. Now we have that on technology, so there's no need to spend time doing that. But there's still a number of areas where face-to-face time is both required and I think also cherished.
Okay, we have time, I think, for one last question. That we would like to pose on the panelists.
Thank you very much. It's interesting we're talking about trust, and this is actually specifically for Airbnb, because as you know, governments around the world are now looking at the Airbnb model and trying to look at the commercial side of that, and in effect, one could say, inhibiting the trust that might exist between us. Would you like to comment?
So I think that, and actually that also relates to what you said about social enterprises, right? Is that because people put their trust
In businesses and institutions. And now with peer-to-peer, we're dispersing that trust into the community. So actually trust is inherently much stronger because one bad actor doesn't necessarily affect the community and actually the value of the community. It's just you take just one peer away from it. And I think that when, what governments are looking at, I think what is quite confusing, I think, sometimes for government is the rapidness of technological evolution. Before there were businesses and there were people. Today we have people acting as businesses. And that's something that's difficult to navigate. And I think that we are acknowledging the fact that it takes time for a legal framework to catch up around that. But we're very interested in and encouraging, of course, to speak with government regulators to help them understand and navigate what is happening now and what actually, because you can't, at the end of the day, you can't stop innovation. I don't think that you can stop people from sharing their space, inviting people into their home, or even, I'm not sure if you guys know Uber or all these taxi booking services. You can't stop people from taking what the consumer thinks is an inherently better service. I think the question is, how do you get a better regulative framework to make sure that people not only can put trust into the community and the product themselves, but also trust into the government to regulate services.
I thought I would chip in. Why do governments around the world have regulations? Is it because they like to have regulations? Or is it because... regulations itself creates a lot of trade-off. It's an issue of trade-off. It's whether do you want to trade off your business, but you also trade off with other stakeholders' needs. In this case, for example, if I'm selling a product, and if there's total no regulations, and if that product happens to contain poisons, so what? Would you jump on government? You will say so. So the regulations are there to balance off a particular trade-off needs of the society. However, it doesn't mean that the regulation should be out of date. Every regulation should have an expiry date. And the regulations must catch up with not only technology, but the regulation must also catch up with the norms of the people. That is the part where the regulations need to be forward. But totally say that there's no rule. In fact, the regulation itself creates a different trust. If, for example, in Singapore, if you buy food, you know that the ADA have said that actually it's safe. We are known for safety. Therefore, you can buy food. You know it's safe. But now today, I tell pure is it beneficiary? So there is a balance. There is a trade-off. So I hope, looking from that perspective, I think that's a better way of looking. Regulations also enhance trust. Thank you.
Can I just regulations obviously important for temporary. I think you made a very good point about maybe it should every regulation have an expiry date to be reevaluated. The other thing that needs to be really carefully done in regulation is that regulators need to be clear that people and peer-to-peer relationships have a place in society, and that you don't want to regulate in such a way that you create a culture where everyone feels that they need to seek permission rather than to take action. And of course, I know you don't mean that, but that becomes really important. And you see that, we've talked in Singapore in the past about this U-turn, no U-turn society, right? And that I think that a place like Singapore needs to be particularly concerned that people don't perceive that they can't be creative without permission, because that's obviously not what this society wants or needs. And so new products coming in and experimenting with them, and not assuming the worst case, but let's experiment, make people aware of what the risks are, but let people experiment a little within reason, I think is an essential thing. And also to make sure that the public doesn't have a perception that a role of government is to protect the status quo business, as opposed to the government's role is to make sure that the population has the best possible business opportunity and creative experience.
Just build on what you said. Regulations must be citizen-centric.
Yes.
So, and that, if it's not citizen-centric, it will not serve the purpose of creating trust. So I think that is the point that I want to make.
Yeah, I think that was a very interesting couple of points that were raised, and I think underlying it is this issue of trust again. It's trust in the regulatory framework, it's trust in the regulators, and at the same time is whether these things can engender further trust in the system among the users and the people. I think we've had a very robust discussion, and a very wide-ranging discussion. We've come to the end, obviously, and I think that we've looked at issues of trust-enabled technology. We've looked at technology enabling trust, or creating greater trust. We've looked at the issue of trust on social media, on platforms where human interaction online and offline, the lines are becoming blurred. I think an interesting point that we didn't really get to talk about is the availability of information infrastructure. I think there's a lot of focus within the developing world to create opportunities for people to have access to basic necessities, water, housing, food, clothing, and the like. In the future, who knows, maybe the access to information, to IT systems, and to the online world becomes one of these necessities. Each time we don't have it, it becomes an issue. But I will take the opportunity to maybe try to sum up that, or remind everyone that what we're talking about today in terms of the systems and technologies, the ability to project trust and to create trust, comes down a lot at the end to how we as individuals, we as people, choose to drive, to shape, and to use this technology. We talk about social media, social platforms, and networks as if it was, something that's like a little piece of hardware or software in this case that you can tap on to use. But I think at the end of the day, especially when it comes to social networks, it is built up by people. It is built up by relationships and understanding of people, and that will continue to shape it. So a great part of our discussion today will be affected by how all of us continue to perceive and continue to learn, adapt, and to use technology, and then to project trust into that system and to the rest of the world. So please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in thanking our panelists for trusting us with their time. Thank you very much for your attention and questions as well.
You can do much better than that. Big hand.
And thank you for sharing.
The panel, of course, has got to get to the obligatory photograph, so, and they're all going to smile nice.